title of this address is the theme of this convention. God saying to us, see, I am doing a new thing. Ten years ago, last November, we began our journey together. And here's a bit of nostalgia from that day. And 10 years ago this weekend, presiding at my first diocesan convention, I began with these words. I am among you as a disciple of Jesus, and as one who has come to understand my life's work in service to the spiritual renewal and structural transformation of the Episcopal Church. Because we've been entrusted with an expression of Christ's gospel that is priceless and particularly well suited for our time. But for us to fulfill the dreams that God has given us, we need greater spiritual confidence and capacity for ministry. Think of what it means for you to have a spiritual home with both an appreciation of mystery and the rigors of scientific inquiry for the discerning of deep truth, with faith expressed in the creative tension of polarities of heart and mind, word and sacrament, prayer and action. Think of what it means to be part of a church that does not ask its members to agree on theology or biblical interpretation, but trusts in God's grace to unite us in appreciation of our differences and the conviction that we are all welcome. We are all welcome at Christ's table. I still live by these words. To them, I now add, think of what it means to be part of a church that's willing to go first, that does not shirk from hard truths, but inspires us to face them with courage. I believe that God wants us to be a strong and compelling example of what it looks like to follow Jesus, drawing upon the best of our traditions and adapting them to meet the world in which we live. Today, I recommit myself as your bishop to the spiritual renewal and structural transformation of our church, which includes an honest reckoning with our history, strategic investment in ministries for today, and a hopeful vision for our future. Now, thankfully, I didn't come into this work expecting it to be easy, quick, or with a guarantee of success. 18 years of parish ministry in one place taught me the value of taking a long view, moving incrementally forward, as our spiritual forebears did in stages. I knew that my learning curve would be steep. I would make mistakes. We would experience setbacks and storms. I also knew that God would be faithful. New opportunities would present themselves, and I would come to love you. And 10 years ago, that knowledge was in my head. It's deep inside me now. I am proud and grateful to be your bishop. And I want to thank you for your faithfulness, for holding me accountable, and for the countless ways you inspire and bless. Looking back, one of the more humbling aspects of the past 10 years has been the constancy of transition. Of our now 86 congregations, all but 8 have experienced a change in clergy leadership, and some more than one. And some of the transitions have been smooth and others less so, and all have required tremendous energy on your part and on ours. And we begin 2022 with 34 congregations in transition, which is to say, with an interim rector, a priest in charge, or with supply clergy. And there have been equivalent transitions in staff and lay leadership, and transitions have been a reality on the diocesan staff. Now, of course, the church is not unique in this. In recent years, especially, we've witnessed a large turnover of leadership and workers throughout society. And add to that the more dramatic upheavals we've gone through. And small wonder that a common refrain is one of weariness. We're entering the third year of a worldwide pandemic. But this I know about you. As communities centered in Jesus, you have gone the extra mile to assist your neighbors who are experiencing food insecurity or homelessness, loneliness or grief. And you have done this amid the intense pressures of holding your own lives and families and congregations together. The pandemic helped bring to the surface challenging realities, truths about who we are as a nation, and you have remained steadfast in facing them, those truths, examining, for example, our historic and ongoing complicity in racism. And you're doing this even after the public outcry following George Floyd's murder faded. And then, on top of everything else, when refugees from Afghanistan began arriving into our region by the thousands, you have responded with generosity and compassion, ably led by our wondrous cadre of deacons. And finally, in Christian formation and worship, you've had to adapt continually to changing levels of risk caused by COVID, pivoting back and forth, and learning new skills to keep people in your communities connected to one another and connected in prayer. And while this was and remains a steep learning curve for all of us, look how far we've come. Look how far we've come. And yet, for all the goodness that's been gleaned in this crucible time, we're understandably tired. But as the Reverend Glenda Huber reminded us gathered for ordination service recently, when we are wearied by the chances and changes of this life, we can find rest in God's eternal changelessness. Jesus Christ is the same, yesterday, today, and forever. She told us of a conversation she had in a city park with a person experiencing homelessness. And he lamented the many hardships he's endured, and Glenna listened. She offered him a blessing. He thanked her and then blessed her in return. He said, "Never forget that when things get tough, God does not abandon. God will carry us until we can walk again." May this man's faith be our inspiration. For nothing can separate us from the love of God. And Jesus is with us as he promised he would be to the end of the age. Jesus is right here. And so are we. We're here. Our friends at the Unstuck group encourage us to view where we are right now as our starting point for future ministry. And that doesn't mean that everything before the pandemic is lost to us, but it does mean that the pandemic is changing and has changed some things about us permanently. We are being changed. I think of the biblical patriarch Jacob, who forever walked with a limp after his night of wrestling with an angel. The change for us is that big, and there is pain involved. But God is doing a new thing. God is doing a new thing. And so as we cast our collective gaze to the future, and in particular to the year ahead, I have some things on my heart to say. Please take from them whatever resonates for you and is helpful. My first word to you and to myself is rest. Many have told me that they've all but forgotten how to rest. Some honestly acknowledging that even before the pandemic, they weren't all that good at it, but they're really tired now. And I realize that calling for rest can seem tone deaf when so much is demanded of us, like the time my asthmatic infant's pediatrician told me that I needed more sleep. There are times in life when rest is elusive, and I feel that way now. But if we don't take time to rest, it will be forced upon us in the form of a crisis. The theologian Howard Thurman, who was no stranger to the harsher realities of life, once wrote, "One thing we can and must do is find sources of strength and renewal for our own spirits, lest we perish." In early February, I'm going to send a letter to congregational leaders asking that they consider giving everyone in their church's employ a week of paid Sabbath leave, not to be counted against vacation or sick leave. Some have already done this or something similar, and I'm really grateful for your example. For those congregations with very little or no paid staff, consider, if you can, some kind of rest period for all your volunteers, your lay leaders. There are creative ways this can be done, and your diocesan staff and regional deans, from whom this request came to me, we are here to help with this. It's not a mandate, it's a request, but it's important, I think. Sabbath, as the Jewish philosopher Abraham Joshua Heschel reminds us, Sabbath is a time to mend our tattered lives. And for many, life is pretty tattered now. I wish I could suggest the same for everyone in your places of work and give all parents and caregivers a week of rest too. What I can do is remind us all to be kind to one another and realistic in our expectations of one another. The Reverend Jennifer Gamber said this to our tending our soil congregations recently, and I think it's worth repeating for all of us. She told them that they aren't falling behind. They are responding to the world as it is. And similarly, in her New Year's blessing, the Lutheran pastor, Nadia Bolz-Weber, prayed that we all might lower our expectations in 2022. Lower our expectations of ourselves, she said, so that we might be grateful and proud of every tiny accomplishment. Lower our expectations of the people around us so that we might cherish them as they are. Lower our expectations of the supply chain and the service industry so that we might focus more on what we do get and less on what we don't. With lower expectations, she writes, we're free to celebrate every blessing that comes to us, however small. Now, I'm a high expectation kind of person. And I have to say, Nadia's blessing has been a godsend, even as I strive every day to do my best. In the same vein, the second word I propose for the year ahead, in addition to rest, I suggest that we simplify. Simplify. Surely part of the new thing God is doing includes an invitation to focus our energies on fewer things, the most essential things, and wherever possible, to share one another's burdens. You don't have to do everything alone. As you plan your ministry offerings, for example, remember that we now have a robust school for Christian faith and leadership that you can turn to with a wide range of resources. And among these resources is a series on the foundations of faith called Discover, Embrace, Become. And with it, you can invite your people to drink from the deep restorative wells of faith. And there are also on-demand trainings for new vestry members and treasurers and many other practical resources. As you look for ways to engage or deepen in the works of justice and mercy, remember that there are many with whom you can collaborate. And as you plan worship, you can lean on your friends, your neighbor congregations. You can lean on our cathedral. It's okay to rest as a congregation, even on a Sunday morning. And please, don't feel that you need to exhaust yourself during Holy Week this year. Remember that however you choose to worship, God is with you. You can simplify your offerings and collaborate with one another. Now, the third and final word I offer today, it's actually 3 words: stay the course. Rest and simplicity are in the service to what God is doing. And God is already doing things, and you are already responding. Trust that the one who has begun this good work among you will bring it to completion. As a diocese, we will stay the course with our strategic plan. When the pandemic initially struck, it felt like this setback, but I'm now persuaded that through the hard work of planning, God was preparing us to navigate what lay ahead, to navigate through what was coming. And fixing our eyes on a few strategic goals each year has served us well. And so we will continue on the path that God has set before us. We now have key practices and lasting tools that we will turn to again and again. And among them are the 7 vital signs for congregational health. And this is our lens for engaging with congregations. This is a diagnostic that any of us can use to determine how to establish a strategic goal for moving forward. This is how we can determine where we're getting stuck, where we need to focus energy. Tending our soil remains our most comprehensive investment in congregational vitality. And you need to know that we are accepting applicants for the second cohort of 12 congregations. Please consider this. But also for everyone, the School for Christian Faith and Leadership, another one of our primary tools now, will continue to inspire our people to grow in faith and to equip our leaders to lead well. And we will continue to partner in ministries of equity and justice for greater impact in our communities. Now, in staying the course, we turn our attention in 2022 to two goals of the strategic plan for which we are now able to give focused priority. The goals aren't new in that God has already placed them on our hearts, and work throughout the diocese on them is well underway. What's new in 2022 is that we are naming them and we are adding them to our established rhythm of 90-day action plans and holding ourselves accountable for forward movement. Both goals are future-oriented and give priority to rising generations. The first of these goals, new goals for 2022, is to promote creation care practices in all our communities. The compounding realities of climate change and other environmental concerns are cause for great alarm. And yet for many, and I include myself here, the problems can seem distant. Fortunately, the Holy Spirit has been at work, is at work across the globe and in our congregations, already inspiring many to action for the care of God's creation in concrete ways. And this year, we will create the means to amplify and expand the efforts of our creation care leaders. We will share best practices among us. We will establish regional and diocesan goals for reducing waste, preserving natural resources, lowering our carbon footprint. And later this morning, we will commission the diocesan creation care team to lead this effort. Its first 90-day action plan is to take stock of all of our congregational efforts thus far. Please pray for them and join them. And to learn more, you can contact Hazel Monet, our missioner for equity and justice, or a creation care team member directly. The second of our 22 goals, newer goals, is to launch or relaunch up to 3 worshiping communities focused on rising generations, so that we become a spiritual home for our children and grandchildren. Now, this goal emerged from the recognition that the average age of nearly all the congregations in the diocese is significantly higher than that of their surrounding communities. And while we intend to equip all congregations that seek to grow younger, about which I'll speak in a moment, it's also clear, it's very clear, that the churches with the greatest success in growing young are those that have made reaching rising generations their top priority, And we intend to establish up to 3 communities for whom that is the case. Now this year, we're going to take things slow. We will begin with a time of listening to identify where it would be most fruitful to invest in such communities, and then cultivate that soil. So in these first 90 days, we are going to create working teams to study demographics, get out in our neighborhoods, take stock of our resources, and identify those among us whom God has already called to this work. In December, we met with 15 such leaders for just an initial conversation, and those conversations will continue and grow, because this isn't going to be a diocesan staff-driven effort, but one undertaken in deep prayer and consultation and partnerships in regions of the diocese. Now, the diocese has planted several congregations in the not too distant past. St. Nicholas in Germantown was established in the 1990s, and all our Spanish-speaking communities were mostly within and in partnership with English-speaking congregations are relatively new, and we've learned a lot from those efforts. We're blessed now with 3 Latino clergy serving as rector or priest in charge of multicultural congregations worshiping in 2 languages. And in 2017, with the support from the wider church, we began Misa Magdalena in Silver Spring, within the parish bounds of St. Mary Magdalene. And going forward, Misa Magdalena seeks to be a freestanding mission of the diocese, focused on the large, Latino-Hispanic community in the eastern side of Montgomery County. This is a young church for a young population of mostly 2nd and 3rd generation Latinos who grew up in this country speaking both languages and have had exposure to broad and eclectic cultural influences. But you know, that breadth and eclectic cultural influence is the norm among most in the rising generations of this country. So here is my invitation. If your church is in or near a region or a group of people who are significantly younger than your current membership, or if young people are finding their way to you, if you are a young leader, or if you, no matter your age, feel called to join in this early stage work of ministry with rising generations, please let me know. Email me and we'll talk. The primary focus here, though, will be on the needs, aspirations, and worship preferences of people, young people who are not currently engaged with us. Given the diversity of life experience, cultural background, racial identity, socioeconomic realities of people under the age of 35, these worshiping communities are going to be different from one another, and they'll be different from what we're offering now in our congregations. Because if what we were offering now was successful, we wouldn't need to do anything new. God is doing something new here. And so will we. Now let me speak to the desire to grow younger in congregations already established in the diocese. To be sure, some of you are in places with, let me say this, some of you are in places with high percentages of mostly older generations, and your ministry contexts and your realities will define your work, and that's perfectly understandable and necessary. Yet for those whose context is younger and who wish to learn and to grow young as a community, we will provide resources and encourage collaboration in ministries with and for young people. Now, this is going to take some time, and our work will begin, as those of us gathered last night heard powerfully in the testimonies we heard from our young people. We will begin with listening. Now, we're blessed that the Reverend Amanda Akes Caldwell will be joining diocesan staff next week as Missioner for Christian Formation and Development. And Amanda comes to this position with a passion to build on the resources and relationships throughout the diocese to create strong intergenerational ministries in our congregations and regions. And she will work with you to offer congregation and regional and diocesan-wide gatherings for students and young adults. And alongside others, she will help anchor our Rising Generations Initiative. And among the resources that the Reverend Jennifer Gamber is preparing to offer through the School for Christian Faith and Leadership is Growing Young, 6 essential strategies to help young people discover and love your church. It's based on a national study of over 250 congregations, different denominations and sizes, geographic locations, racial and cultural identities. 50% of those studied were congregations of color, for example. And from that research, the investigators identified 6 core commitments of congregations that have successfully engaged 15 to 29-year-olds, and as a result are growing spiritually, missionally, and numerically. Now, you'll be glad to know that the 6 commitments don't require your congregation to become something it's not. But they do invite you into deep relationships with the young people already in your life, and to reach out to the young people in your neighborhoods. And for those of us who are no longer young, those commitments ask us to gracefully give up our primacy, our privilege in congregational life. These commitments are to share leadership in order to receive the gifts of others, especially young people, to truly empathize with today's young people, stepping into their reality, to take Jesus's message seriously and welcome young people into a Jesus-centered way of life, to nurture warmth in your community and aim for meaningful peer and intergenerational relationships. Prioritize young people and families everywhere, everywhere. And be good neighbors, providing opportunities to serve locally, nationally, and beyond. So we're going to do the Zoom poll, and I'll give you an opportunity to decide in this moment which of those commitments feels within your reach right now as a congregation, or that you feel you're doing really well. Let's take a moment, and once the poll is up, you can decide which one. Let's give you a moment. We can close the poll now. Well, look at that. Isn't that interesting? Kind of all over. Just think about that. Celebrate the things that you do well, and maybe think about which ones you might ponder for the future. If you'd like to gather in a small group in your congregation to read Growing Young, the book that summarizes this research, we, through the School for Christian Faith, will provide up to 4 books for every congregation. Our only stipulation is that you tell us first who the group is and what your hopes are in reading it. And when you're finished, to share what you've learned and how you might implement one or more of the 6 strategies. And sometime next week, the Reverend Jennifer Gamber will send a survey to clergy and others, wardens, to indicate your interest. Now, let me say that I realize that many of our congregations that have enjoyed ministries, lively ministries with youth and young adults and families before COVID, have seen a sharp decline in that engagement, which is discouraging. But that suggests that it's all the more reason to focus now and not give up, because the needs are great. And we can learn ways together to reach out, to be connected, and to care with opening and listening hearts. I happen to believe that congregations made up of mostly people my age or older are uniquely equipped to succeed in growing young, because we're at the stage of life, the season of life, known as generativity. This is the time when the most important spiritual task for us is to take an active, participatory role in the world through teaching and mentoring and sharing wisdom with people beyond ourselves and our immediate family. It's our time to encourage those coming up behind us, younger leaders, and to contribute to the needs of the next generation. That's our job now. That's what it means to become an elder. It involves sacrificial love, letting go of some of the things we hold dear in order to make room for what is most important to our children and grandchildren. And the good news is that as we do this, we become the elders that young people want to be around. And the vibrancy that they bring to us in our lives and in our congregations is the source of great joy. Indeed, we are changed. As our speaker said last night, we are converted by the young people in our lives. So this is our goal for the coming year. We're going to start in earnest this work together. So let me close now with a word about my tenure as bishop. As I said earlier, I began this work with the expectation that I would be bishop for at least as long as I had been rector. And that is still my hope, with your consent. And during my annual review last year, I told the Standing Committee and the Diocesan Council that with their blessing, I would commit without reservation for the next 5 years. So by 2026, we will have completed the 5 years of this strategic plan and be in an evaluation phase, positioning ourselves for a new strategic process. And at that 15-year mark of my episcopate, we will need to determine together, prayerfully determine, if it's best for me to continue as your bishop for another 5 years. If the answer is yes, then that's what we'll do. And if not, we'll begin the process for a smooth leadership transition, which for bishop positions usually takes about 2 years. But my goal, whenever I give the crozier to your next bishop, is for the diocese to be strong and healthy and well-equipped for its next season of ministry, with rising generation leaders in place throughout the diocese and in congregational life. To that end, I rededicate myself to God, to my Lord, and to our ministry. And as you feel called, I invite you to do the same. And may God give us the grace and the courage to rest, to simplify, and to stay the course. For God is doing a new thing, and we are blessed to be a part of it. We are blessed to be a part of what God is doing. Amen. Thank you so much for your kind attention.